So you think you know the story of Snow White, right? The gentle princess, the 7 lovable dwarves, the magical kiss. But what if I told you that version, it's just the shiny, polished tip of a very dark, very twisted iceberg? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on the story we only think we know. I mean, check this out. This statistic is just wild. Think about it. We know the names of dwarves that were literally invented for a movie, better than we know the people running the country. This story's grip on our imagination is just huge, and that's what makes digging into its real origins so compelling. Okay, so here's the game plan. We're starting with the Disney version everyone knows and loves. Then we're diving straight into the Grimm brothers, and trust me, it's grim. We'll even ask, was Snow White a real person? And go even further back to some really wild, older tales. And finally, we'll circle back to why Disney felt the need to clean it all up. It's going to be a ride, so let's jump in. So let's set the scene. For pretty much everyone, our starting point is the 1937 Disney classic. This was the first full-length animated movie ever, and man did it set the standard for what we think a fairy tale is supposed to look like. You know the story by heart, right? You've got this super beautiful princess, a wicked stepmother who's totally jealous, the magic mirror on the wall. She ends up with 7 adorable named dwarfs, gets tricked with a poisoned apple, and winds up in a glass coffin. Then, of course, the prince shows up, plants a true love's kiss on her, she wakes up, and boom, happily ever after. Simple, sweet, and totally squeaky clean. Okay, but now let's talk about the story the Brothers Grimm actually wrote down. And folks, it is a whole different beast. We're not just talking a little darker. No, this is a straight-up dive into some really deep, really primal fears about family, jealousy, and just survival. Okay, so let's start with the big one, the main conflict. We all know the evil queen is her stepmother, right? It kind of makes it easier to swallow. But what if she wasn't? What if the person who wanted her dead was way, way closer? Yeah, you heard that right. In the very first version the Grimms published, the jealous queen who orders a hit on a young girl and wants to eat her organs was her own biological mother, her mom. They actually changed it later to stepmother because, the idea of a mother trying to murder her own kid was just too much for people. They had to protect this idea of the sanctity of motherhood. Okay, this chart really lays out just how crazy the changes were. Look at this. First, the villain goes from mother to stepmother. Then the organs. The Grimm's queen wanted the lungs and liver. Disney gives us a much cleaner heart in a box. And the way she wakes up? Forget a romantic kiss. In one version, a fed-up servant just smacks her on the back. In another, they trip while carrying the coffin, and the jolt literally knocks the apple out of her throat. Violent and honestly, kind of darkly funny. So let's just really let these details sink in. The queen, again originally her mother, doesn't just want proof she's dead, she wants to literally consume her daughter's beauty by having the cook boil her lungs and liver in salt so she can eat them. In the villain's end, it's not some quick act of God like a lightning strike. No, she's invited to Snow White's wedding, forced to put on a pair of red-hot iron shoes, and made to dance in agony until she drops dead, in front of everyone. So, when you hear a story this dark, you have to wonder, where did this come from? Is it all just made up? Or could it have been inspired by the real, tragic lives of actual people? Well, some historians think it's definitely the latter. So there are 2 main theories here. First, there's Margareta von Waldeck. She was a German countess back in the 1500s, famous for being beautiful. She had a tough stepmother and then died suddenly at 21. The rumor that she was poisoned to stop her from marrying a prince. Getting familiar, right? And the dwarves? Well, her dad owned these copper mines where kids worked. They were often sickly and small from the terrible conditions, and people called them poor dwarves. Then you have Maria Sophia von Oerthel from the 1700s. She also had a really mean stepmother, and get this, she lived in a castle that had a talking mirror. It was actually a really fancy acoustic toy that could echo speech. And the dwarves? The story goes they were inspired by short miners from a nearby town called Bieber, who wore these brightly colored hoods. I mean, the parallels are pretty wild. Okay, so you think the Grimm version is dark? Well, believe it or not, they were actually the ones sanitizing the story. The real roots of this tale go way, way deeper, back to a tradition of what scholars call wonder tales. And these were way more brutal, way more chaotic. The Grimms were basically taking this raw, unfiltered material and packaging it for a more, let's say, proper audience. And wonder tale is the perfect name for them. These stories aren't neat. They're not trying to teach you a simple moral.
They're often messy, morally ambiguous, and honestly kind of weird and disjointed. They're just a reflection of a world that was often harsh, scary, and didn't make a lot of sense.
And if you want the best example of a wonder tale that's a precursor to Snow White, you gotta look at the story from 1634. That's almost 200 years before the Grimms. It's by an Italian writer, Giambattista Basile, and it's called The Young Slave. And let me tell you, this story makes the Grimm version look like a Disney movie.
So get this. In this version, the main character isn't even a princess. She's an enslaved niece named Lisa. Her jealous aunt abuses her constantly and brutally. We're talking dragging her by the hair until her face is a bloody mess. And the story gets into some really dark psychological territory. At one point, Lisa is so desperate she threatens to kill herself with a knife. The whole focus isn't on magic mirrors or poisoned apples. It's on the relentless, grim reality of domestic abuse and total despair.
So, how in the world did we get from cannibalistic mothers and suicidal teens to whistle while you work? To figure that out, we have to go back to Walt Disney himself and the very specific vision he had for America in the 1930s.
Right, so why did he change it so much? These weren't just random choices. Disney was deliberately reshaping this ancient myth to fit the specific values and the anxieties of his time.
You really have to see this film as a product of the 1930s. Disney basically created the ideal angel in the house. Snow White's main value is how well she can cook and clean. The entire focus shifts from survival to romance. Her only real goal is to get saved by a prince. And remember, this was during the Great Depression. The movie was marketed as this hopeful rags-to-riches story. But to do that, they had to strip away all her agency. She becomes totally passive, just waiting for other people to protect and save her. It's a huge shift from the earlier versions.
So yeah, that's really the key takeaway here. This raw, brutal story about female rivalry and survival gets twisted into a lesson about being a good housewife. The movie basically tells women that your purpose, your safety, your happiness, it all comes from keeping a clean house and waiting for a man to show up and give your life meaning.
Okay, so after all that, why does any of this matter? Why bother digging up all these dark, twisted origins? Well, because it reveals something really profound about stories themselves and what they say about us.
Fairy tales aren't static things. They're not set in stone. They're more like mirrors. And each version of Snow White, from Basile's abused girl to the Grimm's terrorized daughter to Disney's perfect homemaker, each one reflects the society that's telling the story. It shows us what people were afraid of, what they valued, and what lessons they wanted to pass on.
And when you strip everything else away, at its heart, this has always been a story about the pressures put on women. It's about the fear that your entire worth is based on how you look, and it's about the brutal competition that fear creates, whether that competition is with your own mother, stepmother, or just society in general. That's the dark truth that has managed to survive every single retelling, no matter how much glitter we throw on it. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. The story of Snow White is still being told, still being remade today. And it makes you wonder, what values are our versions reflecting? And in our own attempts to make these stories neat and clean for a modern audience, what dark, complicated truths about our own world are we leaving out for the next generation to uncover?